Here I'll be showing you how to create the effect of flying glass, as well as simple explosions, as seen in South Park Reloaded. All the shards of glass and debris that you saw in the video started out as cubes. In order to turn the simple cube into a shard of glass, we're going to use the point edit tools. Select one of the faces of the cube and bring it down to a very small size. This effectively turns our cube into a triangle. Now that we have our basic shape, let's give it a transparent green tint. Bring up the material editor. Clicking on the transparency button in the color shader like this shows the amount of transparency in the current color. For example, we're going to set it to 33%, but feel free to experiment around and find a percentage that you like. Once we have a nice green color, we drag it over to our shape to color it, and now we switch to one of the semi-transparent views. Now it's time to make copies of our shape. In order to form a group of glass shards, simply make several copies and position them all around like this. Make enough so that the effect looks nice in your scene, but remember, too many shards unnecessarily increases the polygon count. When you have enough, rotate each one of the copies to a random angle, making sure that no two shards are at a similar angle. This gives a nice random effect to our glass. When you're done with the rotating and positioning, all you have to do is glue them all together and form one object using the Glue as Siblings tool. This way, it'll be much easier to animate them as a whole. Before animating an object, always be sure that the axes are where you want them and that their rotation has been normalized. This may avoid problems later on in the animation process. Now we're going to animate our glass by changing the current frame number in the upper left-hand corner. I'll set it to 30 and then change the rotation of each of the shards. The beauty of animating in TrueSpace is that you don't ever have to worry about animating each and every frame individually. TrueSpace will interpolate the frames in between your keyframes to give your animation a nice smooth movement. In addition to rotating each shard, we're also going to take the entire group and move it upwards slightly. Also, we're going to increase its size a little like this. We're going to also go back to the first frame, and then we're going to move it down a little, as well as shrink its size. This will give the effect that the glass is blowing outwards in all directions from one point. Clicking play, we see the shards rotate and increase in size all at the same time as they move upwards. To create a denser field of shards of glass, simply make copies of the object. When you make a copy of an animated object, the animation is copied along with it. We're going to take advantage of this feature and modify each one of the new copies at both frames 0 and 30. The individual rotation of the shards stays the same, but since they're all in different positions, it's hard to notice. Once they've all been rotated and moved to different positions, we click play now, and we see we have a dense field of glass exploding in all directions. Glass moving by itself is a bit boring, so in order to spruce things up a bit, we need something else. Let's add an exploding fireball to this glass. To do this, we create a simple sphere, and then we bring up the material editor. Now, we want to use a texture map on this sphere to make it seem like a fireball. So we right-click on the color shader to bring out all the available shaders. TrueSpace includes a massive amount of shaders that can be used to create practically any effect. Here we use a texture map. Simply left-click here to bring up a menu where you can select your texture. This fire texture seems to be a good match, so we drop it in like this. We now color our sphere, and we once again bring out the transparency menu. In this case, I'm going to set it to 66% transparency, but remember to always play around with it to find a setting you personally prefer. Now that we have our fireball, we need to position it down there with the glass. Just one exploding fireball isn't enough, so I'm going to use the Ctrl-C shortcut to make a couple copies. Now we have 3 different fireballs. We're going to animate these now by switching to frame 30 again and changing the size and location of each one. Just like with the shards of glass, be sure to place these in different locations and at different angles to give the explosion a chaotic look. Adding some rotation to them gives a nice effect. In addition to animating the objects, TrueSpace can animate textures if you change them from one keyframe to the next. So we're going to change the offset on the textures now. Bring up the material editor and change the U offset and V offset values in the color shader. These values range from 0 to 1, so let's change them to 0.5. Drag it out to each sphere and you'll notice that each one of them changes. Click play now, and you'll see the full effect. If we now bring up the scene editor, you'll notice that we can change the length of the explosion. All you need to do is look for the animation and drag the animation line out to the desired length. This is very useful for slow motion scenes. We're now done, and we see we have a nice slow motion exploding fireball with glass shards. Switching to the Draw Objects as Solid View mode shows us how the final animation will look.